The bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's been interesting listening to some of the members opposite, particularly when we recall that it was only on the 26th of February, the West Australian podcast, that the member for Burt said fixing the GST system is almost politically impossible. Well, we've proven that it is not. And I'm very proud of that on this side of the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, as a very proud and active Western Australian member of this parliament. This bill is a testament to the work of all of the Western Australian Liberal members of parliament and senators, and I want to thank them for their long-term commitment to this and their work behind the scenes as well. All of us on this side and all of us in this chamber, I see the member for O'Connor is sitting in the chamber, very, very committed and active in this space. All of the WA members and senators in the government, absolutely determined and committed, and we see the results of that through this legislation. And we all knew very directly in Western Australia how serious this was for our state, how serious the fact that we were only receiving 30 cents in the dollar was, and there was, without any question, white-hot anger in Western Australia, and we felt it in the same way. And we saw that the work that WA had put into its economy at the time. Part of the anger was centred around the fact that Western Australians believed that they were doing more than their fair share in providing for the rest of Australia, happy to do their fair share, but then saw so much of the investment that had gone into developing our amazing resources, into the exports and into so much of the work on the ground that was being done. We saw a state that was committed to developing our natural resources, and other states locked theirs up, but then expected Western Australia to support them. And I look at some of the work that's been done, and I want to congratulate and thank all of my WA colleagues. We have worked, as we've said, consistently with the now Prime Minister, who was the Treasurer, who understood when we sat down with him on a regular basis and talked through this, why we needed to resolve the GST situation for Western Australia. And the genesis of that has been several years in the making. It wasn't a simple process, but by gee, this government has got there thanks to the work of the Liberal members in WA and, of course, the senators as well, and the Prime Minister and Treasurer. The productivity work, commission work, evolved out of those earlier efforts, and the solution is a very sound one. Mr Deputy Speaker, the only reason that we can actually provide these sorts of results for Western Australia and every other state is the fact that we're running such a sound economic set of policies. Very strong. We're seeing over 1 million jobs created by great businesses that have had the confidence to invest and employ people. We see unemployment at 5%. We've seen the small business tax cuts and tax relief for Australians. That's because we are running very sound economic policies. And as the Prime Minister has always said, the basis for everything the government does is founded on a strong economy. All of the essential services that Australians expect of government stem from sound economic management. But in Western Australia, as we saw back in those years, the iron ore prices doubling, the construction boom of new mining projects and the costs that went with that, the infrastructure costs that went with that, the sudden expansion, the costs that went with that as well. We had at one point 1,000 people a week coming into Western Australia to fill those jobs, and then expected everything from roads, transport, housing, accommodation. There was massive pressure even on our local major businesses, particularly those in the earth-moving, transport and logistics sector, who saw much of their workforce move north, and the pressure and extra cost that applied to businesses and industry, particularly in the southwest of Western Australia. And we know that the 3-year time lag that's part of the Commonwealth Grants Commission formula had a real impact in Western Australia. Now, even though there have been the CGC's formula has impacted on other states, it has never fallen to a floor of 30 cents in the dollar. None have been affected like Western Australia was. The whole principle of horizontal fiscal equalisation is about the fair go. A fair go really is for those having a go, and that's what Western Australia was doing, having a go, and much of the benefit of that was shared across Australia. And our reforms, the government's reforms, the coalition Liberal national government reforms will deliver a fairer and far more sustainable GST deal for all Australians. And again, I want to thank the Prime Minister and Treasurer. Not easy to manage the complexities of the GST formula, but they have done a very sound job in what they've proposed through this legislation, that no state will be worse off, but no state has previously, as we know, fallen below 86 cents, and Western Australia went to 30. And I don't want to see any other state anywhere in Australia go through what Western Australia went through. And that's why the measures that the Treasurer and Prime Minister are putting in place, and our government is putting in place, will ensure that that doesn't happen. A boom ahead could well come. It could come in South Australia, it could come in Queensland, it could come in Northern Territory. And that state could have found themselves under the previous arrangements in the same situation as Western Australia, hitting the brick wall. We know all Australians must have access to vital government services, no matter where they live, across our diverse nation. And the investment by the Commonwealth will guarantee an extra $9 billion to the states and territories over the next decade. This is the funding that states, it's untied, the states can invest in schools, roads, hospitals, whatever is needed and whatever that state decides. These funds are untied, and the states need to make the decisions as to where they apply this funding as they see fit with their priorities and with what's needed in a state-by-state and territory-by-territory basis. There will be transition arrangements in place to move gradually to the new formula, and that's to make sure that no state is left behind during the transition. The benchmark set in the legislation is that of Queensland and New South Wales, and we do see that this will then make sure that those have been historically strong states from an economic point of view. And benchmarking against these states means that all states will have a secure revenue stream going forward. This decision, as I said, is very important in Western Australia. I know in moving around my electorate that people felt very, very strongly. As I said, it was a white-hot issue. It basically stopped barbecues. It was what was discussed at footy games, and I can remember going to a TrackMac event. It's a vintage tractor machinery show in Brunswick, the Lights on the Hill event. Well, I think I got 50 metres up the hill that day because everybody wanted to talk about the problems that WA was receiving, or where they felt that WA was being, in their mind, ripped off and where we weren't getting a fair go. Well, the government, this federal government has changed that. And I do want to thank, as I said, the new equalisation benchmark is the stronger of New South Wales or Victoria, whichever is higher. And again, I want to also, as I've said previously, not all Labor members from Western Australia were as supportive, and at times certainly didn't support the efforts of our Western Australian colleagues in this space. And I've mentioned the comments of the member for Burt in this instance. And speeches in this House that are simply empty rhetoric didn't do any good for Western Australia. However, this is important starting point that I see here with the legislation before us. This is a government that has and will deliver for the people of Western Australia. We see it through this bill before the House today. And again, in recognising so much of the work that's gone into here, into this issue, I want to really recognise the persistence of the WA members and senators, and I also want to thank them. I want to acknowledge the work of the Prime Minister and his work both as a Treasurer and in carrying that through as the Prime Minister of this nation. It was a difficult process. Yes, the Productivity Commission work was very, very important in this process, but having the courage to make very strong decisions is what our government can and does do, and we see it within the legislation before the House. So the measures, as I say, a new equalisation benchmark, the stronger of New South Wales or Victoria, whichever is highest, and all states will transition to this new equalisation standard over 6 years. The introduction of a permanent in-system relativity floor, that's particularly important, boosting the GST pool of funds and increasing the funding available during the transition period, the better of the guaranteeing the states and territories the better of the old or the new system, so that each state will have the better of the cumulative total. And to the Productivity Commission, I think this is equally as important, that that the Productivity Commission itself will actually conduct an inquiry to assess whether the new system is working efficiently, effectively and operating as intended, the check and balance in this one. And the short-term top-ups to Western Australia and the Northern Territory to keep their relativities above 0.7 and 4.66 respectively from 2019-20 to 2021-22. This is a great improvement, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'll go back to where I started, really. I want to acknowledge all the work of the Western Australian members and senators, their persistence, their passion, their commitment to Western Australia, but equally in the Treasurer and the Prime Minister in coming up with a solution that every Australian will be better off. And I endorse the bill.